To begin my research into the cultural identity in Bahrain, I needed a great deal of primary research, including surveys and possibly interviews. I needed to gather data on the backgrounds, attitudes, and experiences of the population and study the idea of representation, which is important for me as an illustrator.
The survey was distributed online, and my initial analysis shows that there are many diverse backgrounds. Specifically, this data shows that around half the respondents have lived in 3 to 4 countries, and 3/4 speak 2 or more languages, though I expect that the birthplace in Antarctica was a joke.
The questions continue to ask about backgrounds, especially cultural ancestry, and how they experienced this or felt about it. I found it difficult at the start to provide accurate answers, as many respondents in my trials complained that they had multiple cultural ancestries that they didn't know how to answer in a single question. I tried to offer a way to do this, but it was a little complicated. It was important to explore the family values and religious beliefs of the respondents to see if there was any correlation with their cultural background and their multicultural experiences and attitudes. The majority of the data showed that though many were close to families, they didn't see them often, possibly because they are living overseas. The respondents' answers to the questions about multiculturalism show that they were open and tolerant to having friends and partners from different ethnic backgrounds, whereas questions of representation show that some discrimination and some stereotyping is experienced by these individuals. A common field was added here to gather some specific information on these answers. One of the open questions yielded a lot of interesting comments. All I asked was for the respondents to recall an interesting cultural experience or interaction. The majority had a positive tale to tell, whilst others described situations where they were discriminated against. The final questions in the survey asked about the identity of the individual, how they perceive themselves, what associations they make to their personal perspective. These are mainly qualitative answers written openly and cannot be analyzed in graphs, but can spark some illustrations. Some of the answers had a sense of humor and character that cannot be done justice in any other way. I began to draw in response to the identity question, wondering if anyone can really be summed up by one of these aspects. The data showed many checked answers for this, and so multiple ideas need to be illustrated as one, which got me to thinking about collage as a means of illustrating. I began to sketch but have developed my idea beyond these simple images. My initial intentions were to gather quantitative general data through the survey and later gain a deeper understanding through individual interviews. I conducted a trial and came up with the idea of the interviewee creating an identity mind map. This required guidance from me in the form of questions, so the answers are not so easy to follow. The question of representation was put in the hands of the interviewee when I asked them to draw an image of themselves. They commented that this image would not have come about without the mind map coming first. Analyzing and comparing such images from a variety of individuals would be a very interesting exercise. One of the open questions yielded a lot of interesting comments. All I asked was for the respondents to recall an interesting cultural experience or interaction. The majority had a positive tale to tell, whilst others described situations where they were discriminated against. It was good to see that there was a variation of both positive and negative answers. Moving on to the bomb project, I could have chosen the route of connecting it to my current project, but I felt I needed a break, and I moved away from the obvious topic of globalization and wanted to think outside of this to a wider and more universal perspective. I was also satisfying a personal obsession with sci-fi by exploring theoretical physics of the universe. With a little research, I learned about the natural, though theoretical, concept of the expansion of the universe. One theory suggests that once reaching maximum expansion, the universe will contract in what is called the Big Crunch, and then form a black hole. I found this very interesting, though somewhat apocalyptic. In contrast to the natural and theoretical ideas, I needed to also explore how developing technologies have increased the reach of mankind across the universe. There has been a great deal of advancement in space exploration, and many more countries are becoming involved with many new programs, probes, and shuttles. Looking for inspiration, I found an art practitioner who also dabbles in editorial illustration. Brendan Moore caught my eye with his simple but dramatic illustrations. This in particular combined the visible, identifiable points of light in the night sky with the linear, invisible contours of a space-time warp as is found in a black hole. These two images illustrate forms of energy, and this is communicated through the contrast against a black background. This American artist illustrates many collections in varying styles, but all show a definite interest in science, often using a limited palette and interesting use of line and perspective, which I would like to explore in my own illustrations. To begin my idea generation, I sketched an image illustrating my imagined view of the Big Crunch, with the mass of the universe, stars, planets, and moons, being pulled together by this invisible force, represented here with the organic hair-like strands that wrap around and pull the mass in. I consider this in both original and in a polarized version. The strands would essentially represent gravity, and I decided to work with some hand lettering that uses the same ideas in the illustration. Though more mainly sticks to a black and white palette, I wanted to experiment with watercolors to get that beautiful color and blend that is often seen in telescopic photos of galaxies. After scanning in my sketch, I began to layer and add effects to create some texture and depth using images of flares of light and a photo of my curly hair to mimic the gravity strands. Though these were interesting experiments, I felt I needed to get a balance where there were fewer elements muddling the illustration. I created a couple different examples to see if a more basic black and white illustration like Moore's images would be sufficient, or if an injection of color through the watercolor experiment would create a better effect. I felt the color was a little overdramatic and moody image that looked more horror than sci-fi.